Hi, and welcome to my additional videos to help you in your Copperplate calligraphy journey. This video is focused on common mistakes while writing Copperplate and specifically about the lack of consistency, and I'm going to elaborate now. You can check on this collection of videos for other topics such as pen positioning, such as finger movement only, such as holding your breath while writing, which is also very common in my experience by other students. I have seen this done as well, and I talked extensively about that and why we shouldn't be holding the breath. This video is focused on lack of consistency. So I'm using a very dark walnut ink. I'm using Hand 101 and an oblique pen holder. And if you are a total beginner or you have been writing Copperplate for only a few hours, I strongly recommend you using Nico G, Zebra G, or Tachikawa G. On the description of this video in here, you will find additional links to download blank calligraphy guidelines as well as Copperplate calligraphy materials. So let's start. This video is going to be focused on lack of consistency, and I'm going to explain now what does that mean. So I'm going to attach the paper together. I'm going to be marking the X height, and we are going to start. Okay, so in every calligraphy style, there is always a really tight relationship between pair of letters and the width of the letter forms. So I'm going to explain this now. If I have a letter form that is quite wide, and of course, I'm talking about letter forms for longer texts because slightly different things happen for titles. But if I'm talking about a quote, the width of my letter informs the space between my letters. So what happens inside the U is also informing the space between my U and my letter I. And you can see here the relationship. If I am, on the contrary, creating a very narrow shape, then this U is going to inform the space between my U and my I in here, okay? So when I talk about consistency, it's gonna be applicable to a few things. So number one, counter space, which is the space inside the letter, and letter spacing. That's the first thing I want to keep consistency. Second of all is how much contrast. So we know that going down, creating a downstroke, we are going to obtain a thicker movement. So in this case, let me position the paper in here. In this case, I'm going up and I'm going down. And of course, I have contrast. But it's up to me to decide what is the level of contrast. And then the third one, if the nib opens enough. So you see how creating three eyes, I have a very, very different amount of contrast. Okay, so if what I want to create is the second level, so level 1, level 2, level 3, if what I want is this one, now I have to ensure that there is consistency between this letter and every other letter I'm creating. So that is about how much contrast. Other things are loops. So I have 2 points in here. Let's go out. Point number 3. Counter, space, and loops. What does that mean? That means that, let's move. I'll write the X height again. And the same in here. This means that if let's go in. If I have a letter U that looks like that, which is quite generous, then my letter J, it's going to use the counter space as a measurement for my loop. So whatever happens there, it's also influencing what happens in here. If I now create a letter V with the nib, it's going to be the same. So I'm going with the V, very narrow V. Based on this shape, I just created now my letter Y relates to the V with the width of both the counter space and the loop. If I go with a much wider letter V, then this clearly will influence the shape of my letter Y, and not only the counter of my letter Y, but the loop of my letter, as well as the spacing, obviously. So we have a relatable and consistent behavior of the letters, unless we want to break it. But in this case, I'm talking about alphabet design and how letters relate to other letters, like members of the same family with their own personalities. So in here, this relates to that. Now, if we don't follow these 3 steps in consistency, we are going to have things that are going to look really all over the place, which it might be what you want. You want to create variations. You want to create a high level of customization. It's all good. What is my opinion about this and about this? My opinion is that it's not right or wrong. If you decide to go with a narrower alphabet DNA, we apply the same consistency across every letter, and to me, it's correct. If we decided to go with a wider DNA, we just apply everything, and as far as everything relates to each other, is good. If we want to create surprise, we might get a very narrow alphabet, and then we have an accent or a letter that is going to stand out massively by changing the width consistency. And we are just going to create surprise and tension. So it all depends on the context. What I think it's going to look really strange is like if I go from this Y, which you can see how they relate to each other. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to create something like that. The counter of the Y at the top is the same. And then now I go down and I exit. So in here, I can see the big difference between what I have inside the Y and what I have inside the loop. And maybe that's not what I desire to have. It is right or wrong. Well, I'm going to say my answer is if you do this, do it intentionally. Do it because you know what you are doing, not because it just happens, but you didn't notice. So in this way, you can say, okay, I understand that this is the width of my letter. And the loop, of course, is not following the same dimensions, which is okay if that's what I want, because it's an intention, but not because it happens out of my control. So in terms of putting this together with a long word, for example, Patagonia, or let me think. There is a word in Spanish that I love only because it contains the 5 vowels, which is murciélago, and that's what I'm going to write. Venga. Murciélago. Okay, so we have the 5 vowels in here. Okay, let's put it all together. So starting with my letter M, which is going to be the director of the rest of the word. So letter M. What I'm doing while writing this word is making sure, let me finish. Making sure that the space inside the M and the space between my letters are very, very optically the same. The R is an exception. This R is an exception. So I won't be looking at the R to match the width of the M. Now I have to add some white in here for the C. And yeah. I'm looking at the letters all following the same angle of the writing, so 55 degrees. I'm looking at the loops relating to the counter space. And of course, I'm not a machine, so I know that things are going to have slight variations because that's why it's done by hand. Otherwise, you just use a beautiful font and let's go. And I'm making sure that the amount of pressure I apply in each downstroke is similar to each other. So I have a very even texture throughout the letter form. So when nothing or some of this is not happening, is the common mistake this video is about, called lack of consistency. And this can be something that can happen in many degrees. So I'm going to do a very exaggerated example in here so you can see it. I'll do it underneath. Okay, so I can start with a really narrow M, which this is, by the way, super normal when you're a beginner. So what I'm not doing in here is criticizing or attacking you. What I'm doing in here is giving you tools to be aware of common challenges while writing Copperplate at the beginning, because I've seen that many times in the last 10 years. So I can start with a very narrow M, because maybe my style is much narrower. And then I don't realize that the letters that are open from the top, optically, they look bigger. So we follow what we think we see and create a much bigger letter. And then we go back to a very narrow C and maybe another narrow C. And for some reasoning here, we are gonna go and do a really wide E, which is gonna look strange. I ran out of ink in the center, so I'm just filling it. Which is gonna look strange because, of course, if I look at the M and then I look at the E, I see how the difference is. And then I can come here and create a really large L. And then all of a sudden, I go back to a really narrow oval. And I might press a lot. And now I'm gonna have a really narrow loop. Of course, I'm combining all the things together, but just that you see. Okay, so you can see the difference in rhythm with the top and the bottom for various reasons, of course. You can see how the U is really large because we didn't realize that our eye followed our brain instead of following what we know. So actually, I'm gonna say our eye follow our hand follow our eyes because we have this optical perception that the U is larger just because it's open from the top. And instead of that, we have to follow what we know, that we have a consistency in terms of widths across every letter form. So a very wide U, a very large eye of the E, a very large loop in comparison to a very skinny loop. And in here, of course, you can see that is much, the contrast is higher, yeah? And that makes it a very, very different texture because we have like a very bold area at the end of it and not at the beginning. Okay, so that is an example of what can happen in many, many cases. The U is a classic that is wider, just because optically we perceived it as wider. So the hand might follow the eye. Excellent. If you want to know more about other common mistakes, such as pen positioning or finger movement only, or holding your breath, or other things, you will find it on this series. Also, you can have, you find links on the description of this video for download a couple of items if you need them. So thank you very much. I'll see you in another video very soon.